Hey, I'm always shocked. I just go online at a random time and people are there. It's kind of exciting. Not kind of, it's amazingly exciting. All right. Wow. Yeah, all sorts of people coming in. Dave, where is the image? What it looks like a place. Can I show where's that thing? It's like some sort of pyramid somewhere. Okay, hopefully you can hear me. I think so. Hopefully it's streaming in decent quality. Let's see if I can figure that out. A Jeep in the Canyon. Okay, let me get a preview of what this looks like. Still not great, but it's okay. All right. My God, there's 13 people here? I'm just, I'm just blown away at how I can go online. I don't know what time I'm going to go online. I think this is a good time, actually. 10:30 is probably a good time to go. I think ChatGPT Plus. Yeah, it makes sense to get one of the online services. I've actually gone a slightly different way versus ChatGPT Plus. Let's get to the right screen. So because ChatGPT Plus, what is it like? Is it $10 a month or $20 a month? You can also get, I guess this is platform just specific, right? I think Raycast, is it Mac only? It might only be Mac. So I use a Mac and I use Raycast. And with Raycast, if you get their pro level, it's $8 a month and it includes, it's $16 a month with the AI models. And that gets you ChatGPT 3.5 Turbo, 4.0 Mini, Anthropic Claude, Haiku, and Sonnet. Sonnet, Opus, Sonar Large, Meta Llama 3.1, 405 billion, Mistral Large 2, and a number of others. Sounds like, yeah, yes, okay. And so I use that, which is kind of nice to have, one, since I'm already paying for Raycast anyway because of, what Raycast can do. Although I'm still using Alfred as well. At some point, I'll figure out which one I prefer better, Raycast or Alfred. I use Alfred. As far as I know, from what I was told early on, I was the first person to pay for Alfred. He turned on payment processing and asked on some list or some forum, can anybody test my payment? Because I want to see if I can start charging for whatever that's called. And I was the first person to pay. It says, yep, it works. So I guess he did a test payment himself, the author of it. I can't remember his name. But so I still use Alfred, but I also use Raycast. So Raycast is the name of the platform I'm talking about. Let me switch to screen share the Raycast tab. So Raycast is basically what was the original thing? It was Sherlock, I think it was on the Mac, kind of a keyboard shortcut to, like command space or something like that, that gives you a place to type in a command and it will run that application. And then there's a term, getting Sherlocked, refers to when Mac or Apple created Spotlight, which is basically a copy of Sherlock. And then on Windows, there was a tool I used instead. Was it AutoHotkey or no? Not that's different. There was another one on Windows, written by somebody in the Windows team actually, but it's outside of Windows that did that. And then of course then Microsoft added the start menu. You're able to do a lot of the stuff there. It's been a while since I've been on Windows. Back when I was a power Windows user when I was still working at Microsoft. But anyway, Raycast is pretty nice in that you press that keyboard shortcut and then you can have it ask a question to AI or lots of other things. And let me bring back the pricing again. So it's $8 a month just for Raycast Pro, which gets you a lot of models. Oh, let's bring that up again. Turn that off. Hide forever. So you get all these models in Pro, and then if you turn on Advanced AI, then you get all of these as well, and you can switch at any time to, ask a question and then switch to, another model and ask a question. So it's pretty nice. It's pretty nice. I try to do a lot of stuff with local stuff, but then sometimes it's just really nice to ask Claude or some other, I'm about to say somebody else, but some other tool, some other model. Does 4.0 Mini have any limits on Raycast? I haven't run into any limits. I'm not sure what kind of limits there could be. But let's see. So this stream is called What's the News of Today, or the news for the last 24 hours. I've been doing it. This is my fourth one. I think I'm getting a little bit better each time. And discovering other options in the settings. And yeah, I think I'm getting better. But I've got a couple of interesting items that I just learned about. They're not exactly new from the last 24 hours, but they're things that I just learned about this morning. And I thought I'd share some of those with you. So let me share, what's the first one? This guy. So here is a video. I'm not going to play it because I don't know if sound comes across. I don't think it does. And but it's an interview with Mark Cuban, and apparently they go through a lot of stuff about AI. I haven't watched this yet. I just found out about it like about 5 minutes before I turned on this stream. But it looks like an interesting. Did I see somebody talk about? I saw somebody talk about what was especially interesting in this interview, but now I've lost that. But probably even bigger than this video. This was from 5 days ago. Even bigger than this one is stop and share this other one.
About AI. He was, of course, the former Google CEO.
About 2 days ago, 2 or 3 days ago, there was an interview that Eric Schmidt did at Stanford University for an economics class, and they streamed it. I think they streamed it, and then they made it available afterwards, and then it was pulled down. I don't know why it was pulled down, but it's pretty interesting that it was pulled down. There's a guy named Wes Roth that did kind of an overview of what he found to be the most interesting bits about this interview. But then you can find, I need a better way of switching which screen I want to show. There's another, you can basically do some searching around and you'll
business
find,
school as a CEO of Novell.
Different copies. It's like the Hydra. You take down one and 10 replace it. So there's a whole bunch of recordings or people downloaded it and re-upload, and they post it on their channel. And it's with Eric Schmidt, and he talks about a lot of great things. Some of the topics that I took note of, why is NVIDIA worth what it is, and so many other AI companies are not anywhere close. And so what is the special sauce that NVIDIA has? Why is AMD so far behind NVIDIA or Intel? What is special about NVIDIA? So he talks a little bit about that, and he spends a lot of time on agents and how 75 per 3 hours and 150 in 24 hours. Other models have 10 per minute and 200. Oh, okay, cool. So, that's more than I'm going to, that's a higher threshold that I'm going to hit in any given time. So for one price for all the things, seems pretty good. Okay, back to what's special about this Eric Schmidt interview. Talk about how powerful agents will be over the next 2 years, and that's probably his bet for the biggest revolution in AI is just going to be around agents. I've got a video about agents and really focusing on Crew and how I don't like Crew as an agent platform. I do like the idea of agents, absolutely. I just don't find frameworks like Crew really help you in creating those agents. I'm hopeful that there will be a better framework for making it easier. But then again, there's not a lot to the idea of agents, but making them, they're still kind of in the realm of something for developers to use rather than something that my mother is ever going to be able to take advantage of. I can think of something that an agent in the future will be able to help with is, so my dad passed away 8 or 9 years ago. And my mom's house the deed for the house is still listed under her name and his name. And just because she hasn't dealt with it. And the website for Kitsap County seems to suggest you have to physically go to an office in Port Orchard, which is some distance away from where we live. But maybe finding information, all the information is on that site. Finding that information and then being able to take action on that information and just change the deed from, and maybe it requires a human visit, but at least get all the prep work done, is a multi-step process that probably requires me to interpret it. And that's probably a great use of, one potential thing for agents in the future. They're not there yet. I wouldn't want to trust changing the name of a deed for a piece of property to any sort of agent today, but maybe that, a company that's able to create agents that will do work for regular people for regular tasks, that will be really interesting. He's suggesting that, maybe that's a 2-year time frame, which will be great. Maybe it's longer, maybe it's less. He doesn't really go into when will we hit AGI, because I think that's a topic for nobody's going to get right. I think there's some people. I saw actually a post today about AGI and estimates of when we'll hit AGI, and part of the problem is there's not really a good definition of what AGI actually means, and it could mean lots of different things. And some people, based on a really weak definition of AGI, think we've already hit it. I don't think we've hit it. I'm definitely in the camp that believes that AGI is still decades away, not years or months or days. It's a long, long time away before we hit whatever that definition of AGI is. And ASI, I believe it is like even better than that. And that's still much further. Yes, sure, there are crackpots on the internet like David Shapiro that's spewing out all sorts of garbage. But realistically, it's still not anywhere near where it should be. I'm overwhelmed from, let's show this illustrator. I'm overwhelmed and get nowhere while learning about Gen AI. Any suggestions or advice? Find, probably the best way to get started is just to use tools that don't require any. I mean, if you just want to get the basics, use any of the tools. Whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or some service out there. There's lots of ways of getting access to AI for free. With some of these tools, and ask questions. The thing with AI in general, Gen AI in general, is much like what every programmer learns at the beginning. Always, never trust the input. Never trust what you get back from, or Yeah, so when you build a function as a developer, when you have a function, it has input, and then it does something and it outputs. There's a box that takes input in and spits out the result, and maybe the function just processes text. Maybe it removes all commas or changes commas to tabs in a CSV file. And so you've got this function, you pass in an input of a CSV file, so text, comma, text, comma, text, comma, and maybe there's extra spaces in there or whatever, and your function processes that and spits out text tab, text tab, text tab, etc. Whenever you build a function, if you just assume that your input is always going to be valid, it's always going to be CSV file, then it's going to break at some point because you're going to get some text that is not correct. That's got an extra comma or missing a comma. And so you always want to make sure that you verify the input. Don't ever trust the input. Always interrogate the input format and then see if it's valid, and then process and then spit it out. And you're basically the function when dealing with AI. Anytime you ask a question and you get an answer back, don't trust it inherently. Just assess what it's saying, and validate that it's saying the truth. So if it's about a topic that you don't know anything about, don't take it at face value. Do some more research in other places. Don't just do all your research on an AI model, but do research elsewhere and validate what it said was true. It will probably give you kind of a leg up and how to get started, but don't trust everything as it is. I think that's general good advice. I think also, some of those online tools, you have issues around privacy and security. And so sometimes you want to install locally. I am biased, but I think that the easiest way to go is Ollama. There are definitely lots of other tools out there as well. There's LM Studio, which I find to be far more complicated to get started with. Or there's Misty is another great tool that kind of bundles Ollama in it, and it's msty.app, and totally free, but it's got a lot of great tools built into it. So that's another great place to start. With all these things of trying to run AI models locally, you need to have a decent GPU, and decent meaning made in the last 4 years, and have a decent amount of VRAM on that GPU. Anything less, it's going to be such a horrible experience that you're going to think this is useless stuff. But so any recent card from AMD or NVIDIA, or having a Apple Silicon Mac is a good place to start. So yeah. That's kind of a long answer to that question. That Shapiro rant was a little shorter than anticipated. Yeah, I sometimes have those. In the realm of wills, deeds, advanced directives, where'd it go? Advanced directives, end of life planning stuff. GetYourShipTogether.org. Huh? That's interesting. Thanks. I'll take a look. I think our problem is that this is we have the deed. We just need to change who's on the deed. And sometimes, generally the process, it seems pretty clear based on reading their website. It's basically you just have to add to the county records the death certificate, and that is like the first step, and then the rest is out of your hands. So it should be pretty easy. It just needs to get done. And whether I have to physically visit Port Orchard or not, or bring my mother along, I'm not sure. Can't be afraid to learn some basic Python so you get better understanding of how a lot of this stuff is actually functioning. You don't have to try to become a developer, but the basic stuff. Yeah, I think definitely learn, pick, it doesn't have to be Python. It could be any language. Learn any sort of programming language and to get a better understanding of how a lot of this stuff actually works, and start working with it. Again, Python is often thrown out as the language to start with. I think I don't know if there's any advantage to doing Python versus TypeScript versus Rust versus, I find Python to be harder to get started with than, say, a JavaScript or TypeScript, but that's an opinion. It's definitely easier to screw things up with your environment using Python, but yeah, that's a different topic. I've been toying with new Gmail accounts and using Gemini and putting relevant documents in each Gmail cloud and then asking my local cloud about subjects. So, something worth thinking about. Unless you go into Gemini settings and say, do not use my content to train the model and make it better, unless you have done that, it will do that. It will potentially use your data to help train the model to help make it better. I did I think not yesterday, but the day before one of these, I had a link to an article from, who was it from? Verge or TechCrunch or one of the sort of major consumery tech websites that went through, here's a list for all the different all the major online platforms for OpenAI, Anthropic, Microsoft, Google. Here's how to make sure that they don't take your data to help train the model to make it better. Because that's the classic example with ChatGPT. When ChatGPT, somewhat early on in the lifetime of ChatGPT 4 or 3, this was April of last year, some folks from Samsung posted like meeting notes and said, hey, summarize this document. And X amount of time later, a reporter contacted somebody at Samsung saying, can you tell me about this project? And it gave a project name and was able to give details about what this project name was doing. And it was figured out that it was exposed by submitting this meeting notes to an AI model for summarization. So I think using ChatGPT or Gemini or any of these tools is great as an individual, because none of us are doing anything that important. And so if people find out or the model finds out and uses that, probably not a big deal. But if you're working for a company and you've got company secrets in your email and you're using a model to process that, that is potentially dangerous for the company, opening it up to all sorts of legal liabilities, and even opening yourself up to getting fired, or it depends if you are not sticking to your agreements with the company. Is 12 gigs VRAM enough? My 8 gig 4060 runs it well. That is regarding. Wait, are we talking about Gemma? Or you said Gemini, but I think maybe you actually mean Gemma. Let's see, what else? A visit to the clerk's office, perhaps. Yes. But I think that that website that you mentioned, getyourshittogether.org, sounds it's a great name for a website on this topic. My base M1 MacBook Air is nowhere close to being Ollama ready, but cloud GPUs are pretty economical to get these days. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how base is. I mean, are we talking about at least 8 gigs? In which case, for smaller models, it's probably good enough. It's better if you have a better, I have on my MacBook Pro, this is an M1 Max. with 64 gigs. So that definitely gets you a lot more oomph to do any sort of online model. But yeah. All right. Well, if it improves the AI about leather crafting, then I'm all for that. And this is just experimenting because I'm away from my home PC. Okay. I have a question. AMD Ryzen 9 5900 and 128 gigs RAM. Current GPU is a Radeon 578 gigs. Any recommendation for a better GPU? Oh, maybe there's more from online. Wow, there's all sorts of comments. This is great. Ulama. Yeah, so what do I mean by a new GPU? What does that even mean? Let's go to, I'm on this page. We kind of talked, before I do that, some of the neat things that were in this video, Eric Schmidt's role in talking with various administrations at the White House and other political parties, how he specifically calls out Marjorie Taylor Greene as really being a holdout that's not letting some big funding go into how the government will use AI in safe and responsible ways. Again, causing problems rather than actually doing anything. Google is falling behind because it's a big company and work-life balance matters for big companies. And that's causing Google, maybe that's perhaps why Google's AI efforts are falling behind Anthropic. Anthropic, Claude seems to be doing better than Google's. Every time Google has announced anything with AI, they announce these our AI is going to be better. You're going to see it as soon as it gets released in a week or 2 weeks, and then it gets released, and it turns out it's nowhere near as good as everything else. So that's been existed for months already. And Anthropic's Claude Sonnet seems to be pretty amazing. And then it's got discussions of U.S. versus China, as well as Russia versus Ukraine. And I wonder, some of the things he says about where the advantage can happen in Russia versus Ukraine, I wonder if that is part of the reason it got taken down. Because everything else seemed like just normal stuff, but that seemed a little bit, I don't know, dangerous or not dangerous, but anyway. And then he answered some questions from the students. But regarding what is a recent model, probably the best way to figure out what GPU, this isn't perfect, but if you go to the GitHub for Olama, so what did I do there? I went to olama.com or olama.ai, whichever URL you want to use, and then up here at GitHub, click that, and then go to Docs. And in here, there's a document for GPU. Now, this is not perfect, but it's pretty good at showing here are all the NVIDIA cards that are supported today, that will work today. Every now and then, somebody finds, actually this card works. But generally, these are the cards that work well with, or work at least, launch it with NVIDIA. One of the common things that people will buy, and they might even buy a few of them, and then try to use them and then wonder why it's not working, is the Kepler 80, I think it is a card, which is a few years old, dirt cheap on eBay. It's like, I don't know, $40, $50, $100, something like that on eBay. And there's a reason why it's so cheap, because you can't do anything with it, at least with a lot of these AI models. And then here are the things from AMD that are supported on Linux and on Windows. And then some ways to override that. Now, with AMD, one of the biggest challenges when who was building this? Daniel on the Olama team was building out support for AMD, was does Olama support ROC M6 versus 5? 5 would support more cards, but 6 is the way AMD is going and will support all the cards going forward. Do you want to support all the old stuff, or do you want to support the future? Well, we kind of wanted to support the future, and they were different enough and not necessarily backwards compatible. So the decision was made to support ROC M6 and not 5. Again, they're different enough that they had to make that choice. And so I think AMD supports going back, I don't know how far back these go, but they go back a little ways. And then here's how to override that on Linux. It doesn't say how to override on Windows. I don't know if that's different. And then Olama supports all the Apple Silicon devices. Kind of a weird way of saying that, but if you've got an Apple Silicon Mac, then you're good to go. How are we doing on some questions? Wow, all sorts of questions coming in. It's amazing. CUDA cores for the win. That's why I went with the 4068 gigabyte at DRD. I run Olama on a machine with two 3080s with 10 gigabytes RAM each and get good results with 7B and 8B models. Great. One of the interesting things about multiple GPUs, I don't know if this is still the case. It's been a while since I've ran this test, but for a long time, if you had a model that fits in a single card, if you got one pretty new, I don't know, 3080, let's say, or 40 something. I'm not sure what the difference is between those cards. Again, I have a Max. But if you have a model that fits in one of those cards, and it runs at, let's say, 30 tokens per second, and you put in a second card, it would stand to reason that you would think that you're going to get better performance. But now the memory is being split. I don't know if Olama, there's a couple of problems here. Is Olama smart enough to realize, the model fits in one GPU, let's just use one GPU? And is it smart enough to say, there's two GPUs, this one is a better GPU, use that one? I don't think it's there. But again, I haven't tried this. For a long time, it would see the two GPUs, think they were equal, and split the model across both. But that means the communications between that is the bottleneck. And it would often slow down quite significantly. So 2 GPUs, 3 GPUs, 4 GPUs would be far slower than a single GPU. That said, if you're running a model that requires more than what one GPU can handle, and you need the second GPU, well, it'll run a whole lot faster than before because you wouldn't be able to run it before with one GPU. So there's some issues around that. I don't know. There seemed to be a tool from NVIDIA that made it easy to select GPUs, but every time people have seen that, it didn't seem to work. The one way of reliably being able to turn on and off different GPUs for different types of different models, let's say, I think is if you're using Docker. Again, all this is based on knowledge that's probably 6 months old. I haven't played with it since then. Load balance. Yeah. I feel sorry for the people who haven't. You've been using AI locally. They've been left behind. Yeah, I think you're saying that local models are the good things to use. I think so. I think there's some things that are better locally, especially with regards to privacy, security. Yes, all the models, all the online services say, here's how you can make sure that we don't use your data for making the model better. But then there was a case where, again, I think it was Italy, and certain people said they had turned that off, and yet their information showed up in the model later on. That was later in the year in 2023. Do they do it right? I don't know. There are some services I might trust more. Maybe I would trust OpenAI more than, say, what Grok is doing on the X platform. I think that's definitely pretty sketchy if you're sharing any sort of secret information or information your company wouldn't want to get out. I'd be very reluctant using those tools. But who knows? I think a lot of testing still needs to be done. This is all still early days. Early days. All right, let's see. What else have we talked about? Looks like I've answered all those questions. Cool. So what else did I discover that was really interesting? I think I talked about the different Google Schmidt interview. That was pretty cool. One thing he did talk about, I need a better way of switching which thing I'm talking about. How do I switch to, let's not stop. I have to stop and then share again. Let's share this one. So in Schmidt's interview, he talked about Mojo. And Mojo is a newer language that tries to be kind of Python-esque. I don't know if that's a good thing, or with the performance of C. So it tries to be a faster Python. I haven't really spent any time with this. I would hope it deals with the platform and the installation or the whole local environment on your machine a whole lot better than Python does, because there have been so many tries at getting that right with poetry and with so many other like package, Conda and Anaconda and all these other things, trying to make it possible to really organize the packages that are used by your application, and they all suck at doing that. And I would think by creating a new language sort of based on that, you can solve a lot of those big problems. I don't know if anyone on the call has had any experience using Mojo. It could be very interesting. Does it work with, so on Mac, works with Apple Silicon, cool. Linux, you need it doesn't say anything about, I guess just it should work with Linux, and Windows is still under development, so you can use WSL. So it'd be interesting to, oh, but you still need Python? Well, that's wacky. So it runs on top of Python. Is definitely strange. Okay, where's my, here we go. Oh, we got some new questions. Yeah, Grok is sketch, but it's fast and free. Yeah, I mean, again, if you're doing it for personal stuff and you don't mind if the world knows about it, maybe it's okay. If you're doing this for work and you're doing anything, involving personal records or of other people or company secrets, I would definitely be concerned with doing that. Oh, Grok. There's two Groks because Elon, I don't know. There's Grok with a Q and Grok with a K. Grok or Grok, I don't know if they're pronounced differently. There's one that's a free open source models in the cloud, and then there's the X thing that's hosted by X. Yeah, Grok, not Grok. Yeah, that's so it will be a superset of Python, but it still requires Python, is what it seems to be. Code with Grok. But when I mentioned Grok earlier, I was talking about Grok with a K, not with a Q. Yeah. Poetry has a lot of hangups with some packages not working. Yeah, there's that too. My thing with any of these package managers in front of Python is that it's great if that's what you're using every single day. I had a colleague when I was working at Olama, everything was poetry. Every command he ran was poetry. And if you're doing that every day, yeah, you get in the swing of things and you're used to it. For me, I tend to do a lot of stuff in TypeScript, but then do stuff with Python. But it's enough days between executing Python where I have to remember, like, okay, how do I do this? Okay, yeah, okay. Here's how to run Python in general. I know how to run Python, but here's how to build something. Here's how to import something. And it's long enough, the time between each of those intervals is long enough that I've kind of forgotten. So I go back to the online and I learn about, I'll switch to poetry or I'm basically switching platforms because I forgot that I was using the other thing before. And now I'm using, let's say maybe from Conda to poetry. And then I add something. It's like, wait, why is this package not added? I just added it. And I have to trace back to, okay, what did I do last time? I guess maybe I should be documenting what I'm doing each time, but that's other problems. Okay, higher than the higher level language, what have we come to? Does anyone in the chat know why ARC GPUs are such an issue for Olama? So I know that Olama was going to work on, I think Daniel was going to be working on getting Intel ARC working. The problem with anything other than NVIDIA, in that video with Eric Schmidt, they talked about why is NVIDIA so much stronger than everyone else? Why is it valued so high? And my perspective has been that NVIDIA is so strong because they have so many software developers working at NVIDIA. And AMD and Intel, it's mostly hardware folks. There's some software, but there's mostly hardware folks. So they're working on just the chips. Whereas NVIDIA has, and somebody at NVIDIA told me this, it was like a 2-to-1 or 3-to-2. Anyway, it's more software people than hardware people at NVIDIA working on software tools to make it easier to build on their platform. And the other guys don't have that investment. Maybe they're building that investment, but NVIDIA's had this for a long time. They've always built up the software to make it easier for developers to work with those tools. So I hear screaming children. Okay. So I think that's making it hard to work with. I think Intel is trying really hard and investing a lot of money in trying to get people to use ARC GPUs, but it's hard. Nope. And they have error installing models I created with automated project that solves the issue. Okay. So what else did I find that was interesting? So let's go back to here. Stop sharing. Reshare. What's the article? Oh, yeah, this one. So this is a paper from Johns Hopkins. This is from, I don't know who Mark Tech Post is, but from Johns Hopkins, talks about pre-training and fine-tuning. This is one of the problems that exists with any model that is trained and fine-tuned. The process takes so long that by the time it's released, the latest information in the model is a year old or 2 years old. And Eric Schmidt talked a bit about this as well. If you asked any model about what's going on, what's the latest information going on with Hamas and Israel, it's not going to be able to tell you, and you really have to provide that in the context. And so one of the big things that he was talking about is how important large context is becoming to help fill in the gaps of what the model is able to know and make sure it knows the most recent stuff. No, there's a lot of screaming. You can't hear that. I probably muted or got the noise gates and limiters and all that stuff set so that you don't hear all the screaming. But there's a lot of screaming. My daughter's probably just excited. Let's see. So how do you go about making sure that the model is always fine-tuned or pre-trained with more recent information? And so it just kind of goes through that. There's actually another article I thought I meant to show instead of that one. Let's go back to here. We'll stop that. We'll share this one. I think it was this guy. So another Medium post about LLM optimization, really talking about not optimizing at the training and fine-tuning stage, but rather at the generation stage. And what can be done to help make it more optimized for users using... Oh. Hi! Oh, you're naked. What's going on? You're out of the pool now? Okay. And I should finish up here soon. Okay? What are you up to right now? Okay. Oh, is Mama still in there? Where's... Okay. So don't go in without Mama. Okay. Okay, excuse me. Sorry about that. But it's interesting that it gives some suggestions around how can you help make... Yeah? Okay. How can you make the results of the model better? And one of the things is best of N sampling. And the idea, what's interesting about the article isn't it, I mean, it gives you like, here's the mathematical representation, but here's also what it's about. But then it gives an example. For example, have the model answer the question 5 times or 10 times in parallel, or as close to parallel as you can get on your GPU. So one of the things that you can do in Ollama is ask a model multiple questions in parallel, and it'll answer them all at the same time. And it's not... before, I would have thought that if you ask, one question to a model, it's going to answer in X amount of time. Asking 3 questions of to the model is going to mean that the answer takes 3 times X. But it's not. It ends up being something like 1.5 times X or 1.2, or it depends on what the model is, how much memory you have, how powerful your GPU is. But the idea here is you ask the model several times, and then you try to assess with all those answers what's the best answer, and then give that as the answer. And so, because actually when I talked about Hermes 3 was recently announced, I showed some examples of questions that you might ask and what are the answers. But because I had just recently looked at a video I think Matthew Berman had done about a new model, and he asked the question 1 time, and then he's assessing the value of that model based on that 1 question and answer. But the way that these models work is they're guessing what's the next word all the way along till they answer the question. And so if you ask the same question 5 times, it's going to give you 5 slightly different answers, or maybe wildly different answers to that same question. What are the chances that the first one is the best one? It's not necessarily the best. And so you really have to ask the question 5 times, 6 times, 10 times, I don't know how many times, a lot of times, and then figure out, well, what's the best answer out of all those? And this is suggesting maybe automating that process. Now, how do you determine what is the best answer? Is it a human, in which case it's a lot of work, or is there some way of doing it automatically to assess which is the best version of this answer? And then it talks about sequential. So this is more of an ongoing conversation with the model. Write a short opening paragraph for a mystery set in a small town, and it gives a something. Great. Now revise this paragraph to add more suspense. Great. Now incorporate a hint about a mysterious character. And so kind of moving the prompt along, moving the model along slowly. And I think a lot of us as developers have probably done a variation of this where, write a function that does X, whatever this thing is. Okay, that resulted in this error. Can you fix that error? Kind of this longer conversation that you have with the model to help. Maybe that's maybe the right more closer analogy to this would be, write a function that does this one thing. Now add this other thing. Now to add this other thing that makes it a little more complicated, or and now add this other function that does this other thing, and link those two together. It maybe is a better way of thinking about it. I'm not sure. But anyway, it just goes through all these different ways that you could try to build your application to come up with better answers. And so some of these ideas around a vacation itinerary, build a plan of 3 day. I think this one was that good. Actually, the next one. Where was it? Oh, maybe that was it. Yeah, so plan a 3 day vacation in Paris. Start by suggesting 5 must-visit attractions. It lists those. Great. Now for each of those, describe a potential activity and predict how it might affect the rest of the day's schedule. It provides that answer. Based on those predictions, select the top 3 attractions that will work well together. Create a rough schedule for day 1, and it comes up with an answer. And you just continue that until it comes up with a good itinerary for day 1. And then it provides sample code of how might you achieve this, basically coming up with a score for each answer, and then hybrid approaches and how might you achieve that in code. So I think this is pretty interesting. All sorts of great ideas to try for your own applications. Now you'll notice that a lot of this code is written in Python, actually. So does this help encourage, back to that previous question about is Python the right language to learn? I think you should definitely know several languages, or generally how to think about. With any developer should be able to look at, if I'm specifically a TypeScript developer or a Rust developer or a Go developer, I should be able to look at this and generally know, okay, I know how things are generally working, and be able to translate this into any other language. It's not like translating English to French. This is much easier than that. Yes, there are some things that Python does really well and Rust does other things really well, and so you have to do a little bit of work translating those types of things, but any language should be, for most of what this is doing, any language will work just fine. All right, let's go see if I've got any other questions that have popped up. Context sizes will grow eventually. We were living in a time where 2 to 8K context sizes, so 128K seems like a boon these days. Yeah, I think one of the big questions that needs to be answered is, especially with Ollama, how much memory do you need to support larger context sizes? And when does that memory actually get consumed? And I don't think I've seen a good discussion of how much do you need, and when is, because often some of this stuff can't be figured out ahead of time. I don't think. Maybe it can. And in the past, when you had a model with a huge context size and you didn't have enough memory, what would happen on my machine is that all of a sudden my machine rebooted because it just crashed the operating system. So it should be better than that. I don't know if I've seen a good discussion of how much memory is needed for the different context sizes, and does that also depend on the quantization of the model or the parameter size of the model. Do all those things take effect? I don't know. I wanted to get into training and making my own LLM, but it's really expensive. Yes, it is. Wouldn't hurt to build up a understanding, though. Yeah, there've been a few courses. I feel like there's been a few courses, or at least articles, that talk about here's how you would build your own model using, like, trying to be like ChatGPT 2 or 1. And here's how they did it early on. And it doesn't seem like it's that hard. So, with a super simple model, here's how you would build it yourself. I feel like I've seen, like one of the courses by Andrew Ng at, where's he, at Stanford? And it's probably on his platform, Coursera, that he helped create. Probably going to create a way to auto-train models. I think there needs to be better tools around fine-tuning models. Right now, it's still hard. It requires too much of a developer mindset to get it to work. How does the Yeah. Oh, you're almost ready. Good. You want me to stop now, right? Okay. Give me 10 minutes and I'll be out. Jade, do you want to go with Jade with you? Okay. Jade, you want to go out there? You want to stay with me? She wants to stay with me. Okay, I'll be out in 10 minutes, okay? Okay. I will have to end this in the next 10 minutes. How long have I been going on? Oh my God, I was going to be on for a half hour. And here I am an hour later. Let's see what else. We're living in the floppy disk era of AI. It's going to be funny to come back to these conversations 10 years online. Floppy, or are we still on punch cards? I don't know. I don't know what the era of AI, or is not even punch cards, but flipping switches. I don't know. Yeah, it's going to be amazing what happens in 10 years. How are things going to be different? Let's see. Was there anything else I wanted to talk about? Oh, I'd seen this project before, but I felt like sharing it because it's interesting. I need to play around with it myself. It's OpenLit. And what's neat about it is I think it's trying to be basically a proxy to lots of different models. Now, we've kind of got that with, there's another one that was the one that made it possible to use OpenAI's API before Ollama added that. Can't remember what that's called. But anyway, OpenLit is trying to do some of the same thing, but the benefit of being that proxy is that it can grab metrics out of the answers and hopefully not add too much latency to the requests. But now you're able to see, it's basically open telemetry native tool that works with all the different providers. See, Ollama's in here as well. And NVIDIA GPUs, I don't know if it works with Apple Silicon or AMD or Intel or anything like that, but also certain vector databases and frameworks like Llama Index or LangChain or these other tools, and then send them to anything that deals with open telemetry. So this one is the one that's near and dear to my heart. I worked at Datadog from the time Datadog was 30 people till I left when they were 5,000, went through the IPO. So I am tied to Datadog myself, but there's lots of other tools that take in open telemetry as well. You can do it yourself with Grafana and other types of Nagios probably. But I really like Datadog. And yeah, so it's an interesting tool. I wish, one of the things I'm hopeful for, I know early on, so going back a year and a half, the team that is Ollama was created for, well, the two founders of the company. They had done a project. I'm sure some of you have heard me say this already. But they created a project called Kitematic. What's that? Oh, okay. Okay, give me 5 minutes. I'm going to finish up, and then we'll go. Okay? Okay, so they created a tool called Kitematic, and Kitematic was really the first Docker UI, a first UI for Docker, and that got acquired by Docker, and those two guys, Michael Chang and Jeff Morgan, became basically product managers for Docker Desktop, because essentially Kitematic became Docker for Desktop on Windows and on Mac. And is it on Linux as well? I don't know. But they kind of owned that product and built that product up. And then they left a number of years ago and did all sorts of other things, worked for other companies, Chef and others, and then created this company to create a role-based access control for Kubernetes. And a few other people joined. Patrick had done a bunch of things, but he was one of the original creators of Docker Hub, and a number of other people have Docker backgrounds and early Shopify background, early other places. Some of those people have left, but at some point we pivoted to switch doing SSH tools, and that didn't really go anywhere because pretty quickly we pivoted again to building Olama. But with role-based access control for Kubernetes, an important part of that is making sure you have a Prometheus endpoint, which is a way of doing monitoring for Kubernetes and for other platforms. And so it was always very important to provide metrics. And I feel like an early build of Olama had a metrics endpoint, and it would be really great to see a better metrics endpoint for Olama so that tools like OpenLit, or even just have a direct integration from Olama to Datadog, would be amazing. I'm hopeful that will still happen at some point, but I don't know. I don't know if it ever will. Python is a member of the club that I assume you mean Apple started, namely code that's almost unreadable. Yeah, Apple script. God, I have similar problems with Python and Apple script, that it is so hard to get started. They've tried to make a tool that's so easy, and yet the result is something that's so hard to work with. Anyway, as you've heard from the door opening up a few times, and screaming up and down the hallway, and my daughter has come in briefly to bring our dog, and then my wife came in, or almost came in, and they want me to get off of this. So I gotta go. I think I'm going to be better. This fourth time means I'm better at a very important skill that I've sucked at every other time, and that is with the whole saying goodbye. I think it's taken me like 20 minutes the last 4 times to just say goodbye. I gotta go. Thanks so much for being here. Hopefully you found this interesting, this little look at some of the most interesting things that pop up in my world, and I look forward to doing this again tomorrow. I'm gonna try to do, I think I started this right around, I started around 10:20, but let's aim for 10:30 Pacific, U.S. Pacific time. I know that's different around the world, but 10:30 U.S. Pacific time, I will start there and see what comes up tomorrow. I'm sure there's going to be all sorts of new things. Today's Sunday, so tomorrow's Monday. There's going to be some new news on Monday. APL. Oh, we're going ancient stuff. APL. I don't even know anything about APL. I feel like, oh my God. Vintage programming language. All right. Well, thanks so much. It was a great stream. Thank you. Thank you for being here. It's so exciting that I'm able to just start this up and people are here. and maybe if I do schedule a time, 10:30 tomorrow, 10:30 tomorrow. See you here. Bye.